Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 4 of Global Contenders, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of touring cars in various different classes, DTM, ETCC, and some which are purely fictional. And in this particular episode, we're featuring one of the real touring cars that are on the game, but one of the touring cars which doesn't see anywhere near as much use for some fairly obvious reasons, and the car is the BMW 320i Touring Car, which after rule changes was ultimately categorised in the ETCC, or the European Touring Car Championship. Now this car is a lower grade hot hatch than say a DTM machine, and as such it does have a lower spec, but it also has a lower price. So there are payoffs to the downsides. Now the price, straight off the bat, is 200 grand, and that's very good for a touring car, because you have to bear in mind that not only is this, yes, a slightly lower touring car, but it's still a real touring car. So the fact that it only costs 200 grand is potentially quite good value instead of, or at least a good alternative to, buying a fake touring car. For those of you who prefer to drive real vehicles, I think if I have the option of the two, I would rather drive a real touring car on the game than a fictional one. Not that the fictional ones are bad, of course, it's just cooler to drive the real thing. Now as far as spec, this car has, as you'd probably assume, a 2-litre engine. You can tune that engine up to 487 horsepower, which is not bad, but obviously is far lower than a DTM car. It produces 284 foot-pounds of torque and weighs in at 1140 kilos, so perhaps not quite as light as you might expect, but at the same time moderate. It's certainly not overly heavy. That's a little bit lighter than a GT500 car. As far as horsepower per tonne, it puts out 427, which isn't bad, and the PP fully tuned is 546, which is quite reasonable. That's far lower than many of the other touring cars in the series. That being said, it does obviously have a lower spec than many of the other touring cars in the series. So the question is, what does the car have to offer? Well, the primary thing, and this probably isn't too surprising, is the overall package of the handling. The drivability, the control, the steering, the grip, everything involved in the overall handling of the car is very good. It's a very beginner-friendly package. It's a very easy car to drive. It very rarely steps its tail out or shreds the tyres, even in fully tuned form, because it has pretty much a perfect amount of power to deal with. Not too much, not too little. It just works well with what it's got. As far as straight-line performance, obviously it's not as quick as many of the others in the series. It's nowhere near, say, a Skyline touring car, certainly nowhere near a DTM machine, nowhere near the V8 supercar, of course, but up against stuff like the Integra touring cars, the Mazda 6 touring car, the Nissan Silvia touring car, that kind of thing, it can compete. So although it's not an obvious choice, and most people do race the faster ones of course, if you are into racing slightly lower touring cars, maybe recreating ETCC style series or BTCC style stuff, it's a good option to go for. Because of those models, it's one of the relatively few on the game which is actually real, and is also a strong contender all round. Now the car is not overly quick in a straight line. The top speed's okay, nothing amazing, likewise with the acceleration. But let's be honest, it's not the kind of car that you'd ever buy for those things anyway. It's just not that kind of race car. It's all about the handling and the control. That's one of the good things about those ETCC, ITCC, BTCC touring cars. They're actually more modest, more restrained than many of the extreme top-level touring cars, and that kind of adds to the fun factor. The differences between the cars tends to be more narrow, so the competition is even heftier. Whereas with a DTM series, sometimes you can have a car which will be so far advanced, such as on the game with the CLK touring car for instance, that's so much quicker than pretty much any other for top speed, that it can kind of run away with it. Whereas with these cars, the races can be far closer and more competitive, and that always makes for a good spectator race, and also a race for the drivers, if that's what you're into, of course. Overall, I would say that 200 grand is a very good deal for this car. It's not the kind of car that you should buy if you're looking for something to completely dominate everything, but I don't think many people would really expect it to. It doesn't really look like the kind of car that would. It's as good as it looks. A nice car, but not necessarily mind-blowing, but you wouldn't expect it to be. Overall, if you're looking for a lower level touring car, it's a very dependable choice to go for. Obviously, for straight line performance, it's not the quickest, but overall, it's a good package. So that's it for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.